meeting up for a 4-hour bus tour. It's the first of the season, appropriately starting up during Fair Housing Month. The group boarding the bus is from REACH CDC, a nonprofit dedicated to creating stable, affordable housing. Even for those well-versed on the subject, there is a lot to take in when it comes to Oregon's history of housing discrimination, segregation, and displacement.
So we often get asked, is housing discrimination still a problem? And the answer is yes, of course it is, though it may look different than it did 50 years ago.
We drove by the bronze statue of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at the Portland Convention Center. Dr. King standing with an immigrant, a worker, and a child sets the tone.
And there's a theme to this statue, and that theme is really solidarity.
First stop is the historic Albina neighborhood, where black families were pushed to reside in the early 1900s. Racist policies and practices kept African Americans from living in other white neighborhoods for decades. So they developed a strong community here. It grew as black Americans from across the country, especially the South, moved here during and after the shipbuilding years of World War II, pushing the black population from a couple thousand to more than 20,000.
A pocket of humanity where citizens are forced to live by poverty, by mutual need.
A KGW documentary from 1967 focused on Albina, which from the 1950s to the 70s was torn apart by huge public projects, from freeway building to an expansion plan by Emmanuel Hospital that cleared homes and businesses, but never happened.
So African American families and people lost their homes and businesses due to this proposed expansion and moved further north. So there's a real loss of community that happened as businesses and gathering places were lost.
Those empty blocks remain a difficult memory. But now, thanks to local activism, there is hope for new life here, with Lower Albina's history and inclusion in mind.
So Vanport, the name actually means Vancouver, Portland.
Next, our tour took us north to where Vanport used to be. It's an area of West Delta Park that includes Heron Lakes Golf Course, where we parked.
My name's Ed Washington, and I am a former Vanport resident.
We heard from a man who moved here as a child.
My family is from Birmingham, Alabama. My dad came out here in 1942 to work in the shipyards with the idea that the family would follow, which we did in 1944.
At its height, Vanport's population was about 42,000 people, both black and white, the second biggest city in the state. People lived in hastily built apartment homes to accommodate a mass of workers coming to toil in the wartime shipyards of Henry Kaiser.
It's the only housing project in the entire country that had a public library.
Ed Washington went on to be a civil rights activist and Metro's first black counselor. He says as a kid, despite experiencing some racism, Vanport was a good place to live. The housing was mostly segregated, but not the community or the schools where students, black and white, learned together.
You know, growing up here, I always expected that I would become an old man in Vanport. At least that's what I thought back in those days, but that was not destined to happen.
Just 6 years later, in 1948, a dike gave way and Vanport, built in the Columbia River floodplain, was ruined. A huge loss for the 17,000 still living there.
Because this was all we had. It's all we had. And we never came back. Within 30 to 40 minutes, Vanport was completely underwater.
With a half-hour warning, most escaped. 15 residents died in the flood. Washington's family had to start over, eventually settling in northeast Portland. Finding new housing was harder for black families from Vanport due to ongoing housing discrimination.
They were forced to live here from May 2nd to September 10th of 1942.
We didn't have to travel far to our next stop, the Portland Expo Center. In the 1940s, it was a livestock exposition building that served as a temporary internment center called the Portland Assembly Center for nearly 3,700 Japanese and Japanese Americans during World War II. Most were eventually moved to other internment camps in the West.
My dad at the time was 16, and he was a sophomore at Lincoln High School.
Marlene Wallingford is a third-generation Japanese American who tells a story of prison-like conditions for members of Oregon's Japanese communities. For many Japanese, their internment also meant the loss of property and businesses that they had worked hard to establish.
Mothers came into the space and sat down and cried. It was hot and stuffy, and obviously If you have a livestock pavilion, it attracted a lot of flies.
Asian communities, mostly Chinese and Japanese, faced the same historic housing discrimination as African Americans.
On this corner, what you'll see is the Village Market, which is a community grocery store that's operated by the Janus Youth Program.
There is more to the tour than we can fit in here, so we will end it with what feels like a positive, an improved way of life in the Portsmouth neighborhood. New Columbia. In 2003, it rebuilt and transformed the troubled Columbia Villa public housing into a mixed-income neighborhood.
New Columbia is a diverse community, and there are 22 countries of origin represented and at least 17 different languages.
Back where we started, a powerful presentation is over.
These are issues and things that we continue to deal with. My feelings around it, it's painful.
Stirring feelings in Victoria West that we need more change for the better.
I think it takes courage to do this work. Anytime you're talking about fair housing or equity and inclusion, that's not easy work to do. I commend all the folks who spoke, like I thank them.